you see me? Is anybody there? Can you see me? Can you see me? Hello and welcome to Wickside Whispers, a podcast where we talk about the strange and unusual. I'm your host Cassidy, and today we are talking about Mothman. Every legend has a birthplace, and Mothman's story starts in the morning of November 12th, 1966, in a graveyard about an hour away from Point Pleasant, West Virginia. 5 gravediggers finished preparing the earth for a burial. The air is the kind of cold that's thick with river mist and the bitter chemical tang of the old abandoned TNT area. It's a landscape of decaying concrete bunkers, hidden overgrown roads, and dark woods. Kenneth Duncan, one of the gravediggers, felt that sudden, unmistakable sensation of being watched. He leans on his shovel and looks up, wiping sweat from his brow. He sees something massive just above the treetops, not flying, but gliding out of the branches like a heavy, living shadow. Soon, all 5 men are standing frozen in the dirt, their eyes locked on the sky. Duncan would later describe it under oath as a brown human shape. It has the distinct torso of a man, but it's massive, flanked by 2 enormous leathery wings that stretched out wide into the mist, kind of like bat wings. What terrified the men the most is the physics of it. A bird's flight is frantic. You can hear the rush of air, the snap of feathers, the heavy beat of muscle fighting gravity. This thing moves with an impossible, sickening grace. Its wings stay perfectly flat, perfectly rigid. It glides directly over their heads, banking low through the cemetery trees, completely silent. No flap of wings, no cry, just a silent, towering human silhouette, sailing through the fog like a ghost. 3 days later, it would find its way to Point Pleasant. Just past midnight on November 15th, 1966, 4 young adults, Roger, Linda, Steve, and Mary, are packed into Roger's car, killing time cruising around. They turn off Route 62 and roll into the dark labyrinth roads of the McClintock Wildlife Station. But locals don't call it a wildlife sanctuary. They call it the TNT area. They pull up near the gates of the abandoned North Power Plant, preparing to turn the car around and head back to town. But as the car swings wide, the high beams sweep across the rusted iron structure and something catches the light. 2 circular, fiery red discs, about 2 inches wide and 6 inches apart, are burning in the darkness near the boiler house wall. Steve pointed out that it's probably just reflectors on a piece of abandoned farm equipment. But then the reflectors blinked. This creature then steps out of the shadows and into the full glare of the headlights. It stands nearly 7 feet tall. No one knows where to look because their brains keep searching for a face that isn't there. There is no head. There is no neck. The massive barrel chest just ends in a blunt, flat top. Those prominent, luminous red eyes are all set directly into its upper torso, staring straight through the windshield. The entity shuffles forward a step, wobbling awkwardly on 2 heavy, human-like legs, its massive 10-foot canvas wings folded tightly against his back. Roger slammed on the pedal, and the Chevy fishtailed in the gravel, throwing dirt into the night as he spun the car around and flew toward the exit. He hit 100 miles an hour, pushing the absolute limit of the car. Roger looked in his rearview mirror, desperate to see an empty pavement. Instead, he saw a shadow detach itself from the power plant and rise straight into the air like a helicopter. It didn't flap its wings. It unfolded them into a flat, rigid line and simply glided through the air. And honestly, before I did any of this research, I wasn't aware that that was a thing that Mothman did. So that was a really weird thing to learn. Kind of makes you think that like maybe some weirdo was parasailing or something. Anyway, suddenly it was right above them. Even at 105 miles an hour, the creature is hovering effortlessly inches from the roof of the car. Linda covered her ears as a horrific, piercing sound echoed through the glass. A sound like a giant mechanical mouse screeching in agony. The shadow of its wings cut off the moonlight, flickering across the terrified faces of the teenagers inside. They don't slow down until they hit the bright, neon-lit city limits of Point Pleasant. The creature veered off into the night, vanishing over the trees toward the river. When they burst into the Mason County courthouse, they were pale, hyperventilating, and weeping with terror. Deputy Halstead took one look at them and knew that it wasn't a prank. He drove them back to the TNT area that very night. Now, they don't find the creature, but as Halstead cruises past the concrete bunkers, his police radio suddenly erupts into a violent screeching wall of static that defies explanation. The next morning, the official police report was filed, the headline hit the stands, and the world learns about the monster of Point Pleasant. Then suddenly, there were the men in black. As November bled into December, it wasn't just the sightings anymore. The monster had stepped out of the woods and into the town's telephone lines. Witnesses who had seen the red eyes began waking up to their phones ringing in the dead of night. When they answered, there was no voice on the other end, just a rhythmic, electronic ticking, or a high-pitched metallic whine that sounded like a tape recorder being played at double speed. John Keel, a journalist who drove into town to investigate, found his own phone lines tapped. Strange voices would break into his calls, calling him by name, predicting disasters that hadn't happened yet. The entity wasn't just a physical beast anymore. It was an infection in the frequency. And then came the visitors. They arrived in pristine, shiny black Cadillacs that looked brand new, but were models from years past. The men who stepped out of them wore sharp, heavy black suits, crisp white shirts, and black sunglasses even at midnight. They began knocking on the doors of anyone who had spoken to the police or the local papers. But if you look closely at these men in black, the illusion fell apart. Witnesses said their skin was too smooth, with a sickly olive or yellowish tint. Their eyes didn't seem to blink right behind their lenses. When they walked, their limbs moved with a jerky, unnatural stiffness, like puppets being operated by clumsy strings. They didn't threaten people with weapons either. They threatened them with presence. They would sit in the witnesses' living room, asking bizarre, repetitive questions about the red-eyed bird, their family habits, or what they ate for dinner. One witness noted that a visitor didn't seem to understand what a ballpoint pen was, staring at it with childlike confusion, before pocketing it with an eerie smile. Another witness noticed a green wire running down a man's pant leg, disappearing into his sock. Before leaving, their message was always the same, delivered in perfectly flat, monotone cadence. It would be best if you forgot what you saw. Bad things happen to people who talk. Could they have been secret government agents? Could they have been whatever entity was haunting the TNT area, trying to mimic human beings to clean up its own tracks? Those are some things to think about. The town was being watched, from the sky, from the woods, and now from the cars parked at the ends of their driveways. Point Pleasant was trapped in a web of static and shadows, and the tension was pulling tighter every single day. And then the tragedy happened. On December 15th, 1967, exactly 13 months to the day since the young couples were chased through the dark roads of the TNT area, at 5 p.m. during rush hour, people are coming home from work, cars packed with colorful bags, wrapped boxes, and Christmas trees strapped to the roofs. They are all funneled into the Silver Bridge, a narrow 2-lane suspension bridge built in 1928 connecting Point Pleasant to Gallipolis, Ohio. Because of a traffic light on the Ohio side, the cars are bumper to bumper, idling over the dark, freezing currents of the Ohio River. And then a sound shatters around the bridge. It wasn't a gradual collapse. It took less than 20 seconds. A single joint in the bridge's suspension chain, weakened by a microscopic 4-millimeter crack over decades of rust, finally giving away. With a violent screech of tearing metal, the bridge begins to twist like a ribbon. Cars slide off the deck into the black 37-degree water. Commuters roll down their windows trying to escape as their vehicles sink into the mud 40 feet below. The massive iron towers of the bridge fold inward, crashing down into the river with a deafening boom that shakes the entire town of Point Pleasant. 46 people lost their lives that evening. Whole families erased in seconds. In the weeks of shock and grief that followed, the townspeople began to look back at the madness of the last year through a terrifying new lens. Some swore that in the days leading up to the collapse, they had seen a dark giant shape perched at the top of the Silver Bridge's iron towers, staring down at the water with those same unblinking red eyes. Others remembered the eerie phone calls, the static, the mechanical voices predicting that a tragedy was coming to the river. Was the creature a demon that caused the bridge to fall? Or was it an omen? A harbinger that had spent 13 months screaming a warning in a language human beings just couldn't understand. We may never know, because the moment the Silver Bridge hit the water, the static on the phone lines cleared. The pristine Cadillacs vanished, and the giant headless shape was never seen walking the dark roads of the TNT area ever again. Mothman seemed to be gone, left behind in a wreckage of a small town's grief. So those are a handful of the sightings. They have a whole museum in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, telling you more in detail about these sightings. I think there's a couple other ones that I missed, but those are like the main ones. And I'd like to talk about what theories, like, of what Mothman actually is. Some say Mothman is an extraterrestrial. Some say he could have been an animal of some sort. Some people say he's an infected mutant. Let's look closer at where the monster chose to hide, the TNT area. During World War II, the vast 11,000-acre land was a bustling, high-security chemical manufacturing plant. Millions of pounds of explosives were cooked, packed, and shipped from those woods. In order to store the volatile materials, the military built over 100 concrete igloo bunkers, half buried in the earth, like prehistoric graves. When the war ended, the soldiers left. The factories rotted, but the poison stayed. For decades, millions of gallons of toxic wastewater infused with cancer-causing chemicals and heavy metals leaked out of the rusting pipes and bled deep into the swamps and ponds of what became the McClintock Wildlife Station. It was a boiling pot of ecological disaster, completely hidden beneath a beautiful canopy of trees. Wildlife biologists know that the deep swampy woods of Mason County are a major migration corridor for the sandhill crane, a massive bird that stands 5 feet tall with a 7-foot wingspan, known for its deep, piercing, mechanical cry. And around its eyes, a patch of bare, bright red skin. Imagine a flock of these birds nesting deep within the contaminated waters of the abandoned TNT plant, drinking water laced with military-grade chemicals for generations. Could a genetic mutation have warped a massive bird into something heavy, distorted, and predatory? An evolutionary nightmare born in the pitch-black interior of a concrete bunker? Witnesses always noted that when the creature flew, it never flapped its wings. It glided, stiff and heavy, like a piece of military hardware. And when it hid, it retreated straight back into the toxic dark of the igloos. Maybe in our rush to build weapons of war, we accidentally brewed one. I personally have a theory that it could have been a mutated owl, and in the fear of the teenagers, they misgauged the size. Because a lot of people don't realize that owls have really long legs. Another theory is the curse. Some people say Mothman was a debt being collected. In autumn of 1777, Chief Cornstalk, a towering, brilliant leader of the Shawnee Nation, walked into Fort Randolph on the banks of the Ohio River. He didn't come to fight, he came as a diplomat, a man trying to navigate the shifting violent tides of the Revolutionary War to protect his people. But peace is a fragile thing in a land ruled by fear. When a white soldier was killed by an unknown scout outside the fort, the garrison turned into a mob. Blinded by rage, they broke into the quarters where Cornstalk, his son, and young chief were being held. They didn't see a diplomat, they saw a target. As the rifles were raised, Cornstalk stood tall. He didn't beg, he didn't run, he looked his executioners in the eyes, and as the bullets tore through him, he spat his final words into the West Virginia dirt. Local lore says he cursed the land. He prayed that the Great Spirit would blight the valley, that the rivers would run with misery, and that the darkness would haunt the people of Point Pleasant for 200 years. Exactly 189 years later, right at the tail end of that 2-century window, Mothman stretches wings over the TNT area. When you look at the map of Point Pleasant, the tragedies line up like a map of a scar. The bloody battle of Point Pleasant, the horrific murder of Cornstalk, and the deadly flood of 1913, a catastrophic commercial plane crash in 1970. And right in the middle of it all, 13 months of a red-eyed demon whispering terror into the night before the Silver Bridge collapsed. Was the creature a physical animal, or was it the physical shape of a 200-year-old scream finally taking flight? 50 years have passed since the iron of the Silver Bridge sank to the Ohio River. You might think a town plagued with such terror and tragedy would want to bury its ghost. You might think they'd want to forget the red eyes in the woods. But history has a strange way of folding into folklore. If you drive into Point Pleasant today, right in the heart of Main Street's Gun Park, you won't find a town hiding from its monster. Instead, you'll be greeted by a tall statue. Every autumn, right when the September air starts to turn crisp, this quiet river town of just a few thousand people completely transforms. Over 10,000 visitors from all over the globe flood the streets for the annual Mothman Festival. They eat Mothman-shaped pancakes, buy dark plushies, visit the world's only Mothman museum, and walk the perimeter of the old TNT bunkers by flashlight. The creature that once paralyzed the town with an irrational primitive dread has become its mascot, its pride, and its protector. I, obviously, am wearing a Mothman shirt right now. I really like the fact that this town has created a thing around this cryptid. They absolutely love it. There's this statue that I went and took photos with my husband, and there's a museum, and I haven't went to the festival yet, but it just sounds so fun, and they make it really into something. They're really leaning into their history. It does make you wonder about the nature of these entities. Perhaps the terror we feel when we encounter the unexplained isn't because the monster is evil. Perhaps it's just the sheer overwhelming shock of the human mind colliding with something it was never meant to see. Point Pleasant survived the year of the shadow, but if you talk to the old-timers who still live near the river, the ones who remember the cold winter of 1966, they'll tell you to enjoy the festival. They'll tell you to take pictures with the statue. They'll also tell you to keep your high beams on if you're driving past the TNT area after midnight, because statues don't blink. But out in the dark, under the canopy of the West Virginia pines, something might still. Thank you for tuning in to Wickside Whispers. I have really wanted to do a Mothman episode, so I figured this would be the perfect time, especially because I was wearing my Mothman shirt today. And keep posted if you would like to hit like a notification thing on here. That would be cool because I have not been keeping up with the 2-week thing, but we're working on it. So yeah, until next time.